themselves. So it's up to you. If you want to chant that, you may do that. Otherwise, we'll put the verse on the screen and you may start.
Okay, let's hear from Srila Prabhupada.
He already did chant the Jaya Madhava.
Okay, so then we're ready to go.
Okay, thank you so much, Prabhuji. We would have loved to do a little bit of introduction, but since there isn't many devotees here, we'll prefer to do that after the class, at the end of the class.
Okay.
Okay, Hare Krishna.
All right, so then, shall I begin?
Yes, Prabhuji, please.
Okay. As always, we'll begin with Mangalacharana. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya. Naram Chaiva Narottamam. Devim Sarasatim Vyasam. Tadojjayamudhirayet. Nashtapraishva bhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavatyuttama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki krishne svadhamo bhagate dharma jnanatibhissaha kalau nashtadrishamesha puranarko dhunoditaha. This is Grantharaj Srimad Bhagavatam, and tonight we're discussing Canto 1, Chapter 17, text number 34. So I will just quickly chant the Sanskrit verse, and then we can go over Srila Prabhupada's translation and commentary. Yasmin harir bhagavan ijyamana ijyatamurtir yajatam shamtanoti kamana mokhan sthirajangamanam antar bahir vayurivaisha atma. This is King Parikshit speaking, and the translation is, in all sacrificial ceremonies, although sometimes a demigod is worshipped, the Supreme Lord, personality of Godhead, is worshipped because he is the super soul of everyone and exists both inside and outside, like the air. Thus, it is he only who awards all welfare to the worshipper. The purport is, it is even sometimes seen that demigods like Indra and Chandra are worshipped and offered sacrificial awards. Yet the rewards of all such sacrifices are awarded to the worshipper by the Supreme Lord. And it is the Lord only who can offer all welfare to the worshipper. The demigods, although worshipped, cannot do anything without the sanction of the Lord, because the Lord is the super soul of everyone, both moving and non-moving. In Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9, text 23, the Lord himself confirms this in the following shloka. Ye pyanya devata bhakta yajante shraddhayan vitaha te pimameva kaunteya yajantya vidhi purvakam. Whatever a man may sacrifice to other gods, O son of Kunti, is really meant for me alone, but it is offered without true understanding. End quote. The fact is that the Supreme Lord is one without a second. There is no God other than the Lord himself. Thus, the Supreme Lord is eternally transcendental to the material creation. There are many who worship the demigods like the sun, the moon, and Indra, who are only material representatives of the Supreme Lord. These demigods are indirect, qualitative representations of the Supreme Lord. A learned scholar or a devotee, however, knows who is who. Therefore, he directly worships the Supreme Lord and is not diverted by the material qualitative representations. Those who are not so learned worship such qualitative material representations, but their worship is unceremonious because it is irregular. Om Jnana Timirantasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sarivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Haripriye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvishe Namaham Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Madgavirapi Gopala Svipuryat Kripaya Yadi Tadaiva Sampayah Pitva Prishye Yustat Priyajanaha. Once again, we have the verse Yasmin Harir Bhagavan Idjavana Idjatma Murtir Yajatam Sham Tanoti Kaman Amokhan Stirachangamana Antar Bahir Vayu Rivaisha Atma. In all sacrificial ceremonies, although sometimes a demigod is worshipped, the Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead, is worshipped because he is the supersoul of everyone and exists both inside and outside, like the air. Thus, it is he only who awards all welfare to the worshipper. Srila Prabhupada's purport is very clear. There are a few variant readings of the Bhagavatam text here, which sometimes happens. Sometimes different versions of the Bhagavatam say slightly different things, or sometimes different acharyas say that they accept a different version of the text. So here we have a few readings. In place of Idjatma Murti, some say the text should only be Idjamurti. The meaning is more or less the same. Others say the text should be Ishtatma Murti instead. And the phrase Ishtatma Murti is what Madhvacharya has commented on in his commentary on this text. There he says very simply, Ishtatma Murti Ittatanoho. That means that the phrase Ishtatma Murti means the form of desire, or the form that is desired. Ichatanohu. There are several grammatically correct interpretations possible here. First of all, we should note that the word tanu has many meanings. Among them, it can mean body, or it can mean form, or it can mean the self, atma. And the word atma itself also means the same things. It can refer to the body, it can refer to the mind, or it can refer to the spirit self. So when Madhvacharya says that the word Ishtatma Murti means Ichatanuhu, it seems pretty clear what he means, that we're talking about the form that is what one desires. That's why we worship the Supreme Lord in general. But we should note that there are many different ways to take this. Ishtatma Murti can be taken as the essential form that one desires, or it can be taken as the personal form of one's chosen deity, because Ishta also means one's chosen deity. It can also mean the form of body that one desires, because we may just be desiring elevation to Sarga Loka. That's one reason why people worship the Lord or demigods. They want to take birth as a demigod themselves. So, although Madhvacharya's commentary is very brief, it only consists of 2 words, but they convey multiple and very significant connotations, which we should take note of. Therefore, it's a good idea to see what his own commentator, later one of his spiritual descendants, Vijayadhwaj Tirtha, whom Srila Prabhupada often comments in his purports. He's also given his own commentary on this verse. He says, Yasmin chatma murti chatanoho ijamano harir bhagavan yajatam pumsam sham sukham tanoti prapanchayati amoghan kamanapi tanoti iti. Kim vishishtoho hari sthira jangamanam antarbahishya vartamana ka iva vayurivatma vyapta isha pravartakaha. Here, the word ichatanuhu, meaning the form of Atma that is desired. Bhagavan Hari is being worshipped by those engaged in sacrifice. You may recall in the previous text, text number 33, Maharaj Parikshit is telling Kali personified, you can't live here because this is the place where people who perform sacrifices live. This is a special place, Brahmavarta. We'll say more about that in a moment. But it corresponds roughly to north central India. You can say from the Himalayas in the north to the Vindhya mountains in the south and the 2 seas on either side. Roughly, that place is called Aryavarta or Brahmavarta. It's considered a very special place, and those who take birth in there are very fortunate and highly qualified, actually. Srila Prabhupada says in many places. You can read 5th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 19, if you want to hear some of Srila Prabhupada's comments of that nature. But for the time being, here, Bhagavan Hari is being worshipped by those engaged in sacrifice. And the word sham in this verse, it means happiness in general. And tanoti means that the Lord arranges. Here we have Vijayadhwaj Tirtha glosses the word tanoti as prapanchayati. He fulfills one's desires. What kinds of desires does the Lord fulfill? Kaman amoghan, desires that are free from sin. You cannot be sinful in this world and think that you will also be happy. It doesn't work that way. And the Lord also will not fulfill desires that are sinful. So one has to follow the rules if we want to be happy. That's called dharma. So he raises the question, Vijayadhwaj Tirtha, rhetorical question. He says, Kim Vishishto? How is it, well, what's special about Lord Hari? And then he answers the question. Lord Hari is the only one of these deities who exist within and without everyone. That's here called Antarbahihi, inner, inside and outside. Demigods are not like that. This is why the translation says, demigods, they, in order to fulfill what we're asking from them, they have to go to their boss and get permission. Just like in India, everything works by bribery. We all know this. So you can go to a mid-level management authority and you can maybe bribe him or do something, whatever you have to do to get your thing done. There's even a word for that, jugar. So demigod worship is a little bit like that. And therefore the word that Vijayadhwaj Tirtha uses here to gloss tanoti, tanoti means who fulfills your desire or rearranges it. The word Vijayadhwaj Tirtha uses here is prapanchayati, and prapancha actually means to cheat someone. So we're actually being cheated out of our eternal happiness if we're going to demigods and expecting to get something from them. According to one acharya, This is why Ganesha or Ganapati is called Vinayaka. Vinayaka. Prefix, in Sanskrit, a prefix is called an upasarga. So the prefix, Nayaka means a leader, neta. And the prefix V means only two things. It means either Vishesh, in particular, very much so, or it means Vigata, means going in the opposite direction. So Vinayaka means he's actually leading you in the opposite direction. That is your ultimate welfare. We can say more about that, but we can note here that, we'll read Sridhar Swami's commentary to see what he says about this. All right, so Lord Hari is the Paramatma. This is the point. No other demigod can claim to be in everyone's heart. And then to explain, how is it that he is the Paramatma inside and outside of everything? Vayu iva, just like the air. Here, Vayu means prana, mukhya prana. That prana which is flowing throughout all things in the universe. That Vayu. So within our body and outside of our body, Vayu is there. And Vayu is sustaining all life. We have, some say 5, some say 10 airs that Vayu or pranas that are circulating throughout our human system, and other forms have different arrangements, but prana is always there in all living beings. To sustain life within a material body, prana is required. And similarly, to take note of and to fulfill the desires of all the living beings who are approaching anyone to fulfill their desires, the requirement is Paramatma. And no one who is not Paramatma can actually do that. Only Paramatma can do that. This is the argument given in this verse by Raja Parikshit, as explained by Madhvacharya and his follower Vijayadhwaj Tirtha. Now, in our Sampradaya, we mainly follow Sridhar Swami. Sridhar Swami has given his own similar commentary. He says, Idyayagas tadrupa murtir yasya, sham kshemam kamamscha, nanuindradayo deva idyante natu haristatraha, esha stavaradina matmeti, tathapi jivavan na parichinna ityaha antar bahirati. Yatha vayu prana rupenantasthopi bahirapi asti tadvat sarvantaryamishwaropi. That means the sacrifices that those who were born in Aryavarta perform take the form usually that brings about their two things. One, their desires, kaman, and two, sham. Sham means their ultimate welfare. We can say their shreyas. So these two things, what is good for you, what you want, you can say, short-term happiness as well as long-term happiness. What is your ultimate spiritual welfare? According to our desire. If we don't want to make spiritual advancement, then we may not get that from our worship. Because Krishna, he's upadrashtanu mantacha, as Paramatma. He's witnessing everything from within, and anumanta, he's giving permission or not. If we desire to be bewildered, then the Lord will supply us the bewilderment that we require in order to pursue our material desires. That's the ignorance that we're in right now. So, Raja Parikshit speaks this verse just in case one thinks that Indra and the other gods should be worshipped, but not Hari. Some people think like this. If you want to get good health, you have to worship the sun god and no one else will do. If you want to get, whatever you want, the different demigods, even in the Bhagavatam, it's recognized that different demigods, they're very expert at fulfilling certain kinds of desires. And so some people think that you have to worship that demigod and that demigod only to fulfill that desire, but it's not so. This is the point that Sridhar Swami is raising here. So he says, therefore, the word Atma refers to non-moving beings and others as well. Moving and non-moving, that's what he's saying indirectly. The words inside and outside say that as jivas, they're not detached from the Lord. In other words, the Lord is with them outside of their bodies. He's with them within their bodies as well. He doesn't leave us. And the example of the air is used because it's situated both within and without in the form of prana. He says it directly. Prana rupenantas topi. This vayu means it's prana, we've already mentioned. So likewise, the Lord is the indwelling witness of all. Just like the prana goes everywhere, so the Lord goes everywhere. This is the implication. His own commentator, Vamshitara, has clarified this. Ijjanam indradi devanam atmamurti antaryami rupa. Te atmamurtayo yasyeti va. Tvai vartamane sati. Tatanaiva syaditi bhava. This is the Paramatma. He is the soul within those forms who are worshipped. Even the demigods have Paramatma within their hearts, and that is Vishnu. That is Krishna, Paramatma. So even if you worship Indra, that's fine, but Indra has Paramatma within his heart, and the Lord is fulfilling both your desire and Indra's desire. This is there in the Upanishads, actually. We hear this. Jivo, what is that? Nityo nityanam chetanash chetananam eko bahunam yo vidithati kama. This is the topic of tonight's verse. We're all eternal. All living beings are eternal. And we're all conscious also. We're all persons. But only one person is fulfilling all the desires of all the other persons. And he can do that because, like the air, he is within all beings and without all beings as well. Only Paramatma has this qualification. That is his specialty, as Vijay Tirtha already pointed out. That is the point of tonight's verse. So this Vamshitara Acharya makes it very simple when he says this. He is the soul within those forms who are themselves worshipped. That's the point, such as Indra. Or another way to take it is that they're just his representatives. And this is what Srila Prabhupada is focused on in his purports. I think I counted 3 times at least, Srila Prabhupada says that these are material qualitative representations of the Supreme Lord. They're material, they are qualified by the modes of nature, that's implicit, and they are representing the Lord only. They are not independent. This is the point. In the Padma Purana, we have Dashanama Paradhas, 10 offenses that we must avoid when we're chanting Hare Krishna. And one of them is to think that these devatas are equal to Vishnu or independent of Vishnu. Very important idea. So they're all representing Paramatma only, and they're just as dependent on Paramatma as we are. The idea, okay, so then that's one point. And then the second thing is that Maharaj Parikshit's mood here is that this situation of so many people recognizing the Lord and sacrificing to the Lord for whatever purpose they may sacrifice, material or spiritual, that's not going to happen as long as you are around. Who is he talking to? He's talking to Kali. Kali Yuga personified. Kali Yuga is introducing so much sin. And Raja Parikshit is very mad. We've heard from previous verses, he actually wanted to kill this Kali on the spot. But because Kali surrendered, he refrained and he controlled his anger. Now, finally, and as usual, the best commentary of our predecessor acharyas is coming from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. He says many of the same things, so I won't go through the Sanskrit, but his point is that, again, someone might object that, the devas should also be worshipped, not just Bhagavan. Many times we hear this argument. People say, okay, ISKCON, everything is very fine, you people are nice, but why only Krishna? Why are you so fanatical? So this is a question that our acharyas have been commenting on for hundreds of years now. We've gone through several hundred years of acharyas so far in this class. So this is the question. And Therefore, he points out that this is why Maharaj Parikshit says that he is the soul within those forms who are worshipped, such as Indra, or their representative forms of himself. Actually, there's Vamshidhara Acharya, we heard him say this previously, but he's late. He was a Gaudiya Vaishnava residing in Kurukshetra in, I believe, the 17th or maybe 18th century. And actually, he's taking his ideas from Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has said this first. So these two arguments are there. Lord is, you can take Atma to mean that the Lord is the Paramatma within the hearts of all living beings, including the demigods. That's how he understands who's praying to them for what. Or you can say these demigods, they're just mundane representatives of the Paramatma. Either way you can take it. This is the point. So the meaning is that he brings about both the material desires, kaman, and the spiritual happiness, sham, for all citizens, both moving and non-moving. That's also being stated here. So, and then he gives the same example, like the life air that flows throughout the entire cosmos, the Lord can be experienced inside and outside both. So again, his mood is that Kali, while you're here, this situation of recognition of the Supreme Lord and sacrifice to the Supreme Lord, it's not going to happen. So the gist of the verse is, in this country, Bhagavan Sri Hari resides in the form of sacrifices. He's worshipped through sacrifice, and he provides auspiciousness to those who sacrifice. You can't be happy without sacrifice. Krishna also says this in Bhagavad Gita, you may recall. So the Lord of all things, the Lord of everyone, is always fulfilling everyone's desires because he remains situated constantly like the air, Vayu, both within and without all the moving and non-moving living beings. My god brother Bhanu Swami has given his own translation of this verse, which I will just briefly recite. Quote, you cannot reside where the Lord Bhagavan, who is the soul of the Devatas also, and who exists inside and outside like the air, being worshipped, distributes material and spiritual prosperity, what is useful to all moving and non-moving beings, to the worshiper, end quote. Okay. So the preceding verses in this passage have already told us that Kali Yuga has already entered even into demigods, what to speak of human beings. And Maharaj Parikshit, we've also seen, he was very careful to spare the surrendered Kali because he didn't want Kali Yuga to enter him. If we have flaws in our performance of dharma, dharma means your ordinary responsibility as a human being to remain pious and to remain in a state of grace, we might say, as the Christians say, then we have to recognize, we have to perform our dharmas. And if there's any, I want to say, any flaw, any dosha in the performance of our dharma, then it's very dangerous, because at that point, this Kali Yuga, who's just waiting to get his foot in the door, he can come inside. Later on in this passage, we will see that Maharaj Parikshit makes the arrangement that you can get in here as long as people are committing sinful activities. What are those sinful activities? Meat eating, intoxication, gambling, and illicit sex. These 4 very sinful things, they have to be avoided at all costs because they will only cause us problems. Even in the short term, they will cause us problems, but certainly in the long term, they will cause us problems. We will become contaminated by Kali if we engage in these sinful activities. And therefore, that's why Maharaj Parikshit wanted to chase Kali out of Brahmavarta. He didn't belong there. The Brahmavarta, as he's pointing out, is a place where pious people will be. This is India. And unfortunately, Indians in very large numbers nowadays are neglecting all these things. For whatever reasons, they're neglecting them. This is, Kali has entered. This is all we can say. All right, so Navartadavyamtara dharma bantho dharmena satyena navartadavye brahmavarte yatra yajanti yajnair Yagneshwaram Yagnavitana Vijnaha. This is the previous text, 33. You cannot stay in Brahmavarta where dharma and truth suitably reside, and where knowers of sacrifice worship the Lord of sacrifice with sacrifice, through sacrifice, I need to say. So this is the point. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has commented there already. You may have heard that the word satya is used in that verse because satya is the prominent element of dharma, in Kali Yuga especially. We have already heard this bull of dharma, the figurative bull of dharma. He is hobbling on 3 legs. And the only leg that's really functioning properly is the leg of truthfulness, honesty. You don't get anywhere without truthfulness. If we're not true with ourselves, if we're not true with others, if we're not true to the Supreme Lord, we cannot expect anything auspicious in our lives. So therefore, this Kali was driven out of Brahmavarta, the region we've already described. That's according to Manu Smriti, which I'll quote. The land created by gods and lying between the divine rivers Saraswati and Drishadvati is called Brahmavarta. The conduct handed down from generation to generation among the social classes and the intermediate classes of that land is called the conduct of good people. Kurukshetra and the land of the Matsyas, Panchalas, Shodasenakas constitute what we call the land of Brahmin seers, which borders on the Brahmavarta. All the people of the earth should learn their respective practices from a Brahmin born in that land. So, I mentioned already in this connection, Srila Prabhupada's many purports throughout the 19th chapter of the 5th canto. Again, I will direct you to read that chapter if you want to know more about this, because it's very clear there from Srila Prabhupada's purports that the people of this area are very special. Even now, they still have some idea of their spiritual identity and their duty in life compared to other countries in the world. Certainly compared to, say, North Korea, for one example. Indians, however fallen they may be, at least they have an idea that I'm an eternal spirit soul. There is such a thing as reincarnation. They may not be able to control their senses, but they at least know that it's not so good to eat meat or, do all the other nonsense things that they're doing nowadays. So this is the point. And Srila Prabhupada, his purports throughout chapter 19 of the 5th canto make it very clear that he agrees with all this, and he's really emphasizing a principle that we hear throughout his books in general. What is that principle? It is the instruction of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Bharata bhumite hoilo manushya janma jar janma shartha kori parapar upakar. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's instruction is that those who are born in Bharatvarsha, especially, they should, first of all, become perfect. Janma sarthak kori. Then they can actually be in a position to do work, something good for others. Koroparupakar. Anyone who knows any Indo-Aryan language, we have absolutive verbs and we have the finite verb, and the absolutive is always subordinate to the finite verb. What I'm saying in short is that if you say Bajar jake, reshma kharidna. So you have to go to the market if you're going to buy some silk. You can't buy the silk before you get to the market. The first verb is subordinate, it depends on the second. So in the same way, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was giving us this instruction. Janma shartha kori koroparupakar. Tabhi koroparupakar. Only then can you actually do something good for others. And this is the point, that actually Indians should do this. Those who are fortunate enough to be born in Bharatvarsha. And as we've heard from Manu already, if we have not been so fortunate, then at least we should learn from such a person born in Bharatvarsha. And we're very fortunate because due to the extremely I mean to say sacrificial spirit, since we're talking about sacrifices, due to the tremendous sacrifices that our own founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada made, only for all of us, we have the good fortune of hearing from him even a half century after his physical departure from this planet. How is that so? He says, I will live forever in my books. Books are the basis, preaching is the essence, utility is the principle, purity is the force. These things Srila Prabhupada used to say. Now, I heard a class, I don't recall hearing any classes on tonight's verse from Srila Prabhupada, but I did hear a class from the late Tamal Krishna Goswami on September 21st, 1978, a long time ago. That would have been in St. Louis, Missouri, in the USA. And you can find that class, actually. You can download that audio file from tamalkrishnagoswami.com, and I highly recommend that you do so, because that his entire lecture mentioned something about demigod worship, which is apparently the topic of tonight's verse, but the main emphasis is this very important principle. Any of us who are born as human beings of any sort, even if we're very imperfect human beings, we can become perfect by chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, and following this process of Krishna consciousness as taught in the many books translated and commented on by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada, the founder and Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. So as the point is that we should really think about this. This is our duty, not just the Indians, but anyone taking birth as a human being, here and now, wherever you may be at this time, you have this responsibility to do yourself good and to do good to others as a result. Krishna gives this instruction in the 10th canto of the SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM. He says, Etavan janma safalyam dehinami dehishu pranayad arthayar dhya vacha shreya acharanam sada. Any person, he says, who wants to make his life perfect or successful, he has an obligation to offer 4 things to the Supreme Lord and to do other people's welfare in 4 ways. The first and best thing, pranayehi, you should give all your life. We've been mentioning the pranas, the life airs. Here, prana is used in a more general sense. It means your life. You give your life, your whole life, wholeheartedly, we can say. Pranayehi, you should give your life to this movement. You should practice Krishna consciousness wholeheartedly, and you should propagate Krishna consciousness wholeheartedly. If you cannot do that, that's okay. Not everyone is a great Mahatma like Srila Prabhupada, or even like Tamal Krishna Goswami we mentioned, or other great souls in this movement who are given their entire lives. So then what do? Arthaihi, these are Krishna's instructions. You can give your assets, you can give some wealth in particular. That always helps to spread Krishna consciousness. It requires a lot of capital. So arthayar, if you cannot do that, then dhya, you can give your thoughts. You can use your intelligence in Krishna service. You can use your mind to cultivate Krishna consciousness. Dhya means by the intelligence. And vacha, by your words. If nothing else, you can at least say something nice about Krishna consciousness and tell someone else about ISKCON, that even if it's so simple as to say that, you know what, why don't we go to the Hare Krishna temple this Sunday? They have really nice prasadam there. This is the beginning. Krishna says, Shreya acharanam sada. You can behave in a way that elevates other people, even just by speaking such a thing. So everyone should do this, actually. And especially those who are, as we said before, born in India. So Maharaj Parikshit in this passage, he's very conscious of his duty. It's already been said, you can review some of the previous verses, that the foremost duty of a king is to protect those who are suffering, especially suffering at the hands of ill-doers. And it's the king's own duty is to make sure that religious principles are being followed, etc., etc., etc. These things have all been explained already in this passage. So Maharaj Parikshit is very conscious of his duty, and that's why he speaks this verse tonight. I'll just repeat briefly and then we'll end. He's pointing out to the age of Kali that in so many sacrifices that people especially in India do, although they may be worshiping demigods, actually the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the real one to be worshipped because the demigods depend on him to fulfill others' desires. And because the Lord exists within all living beings, he understands and facilitates everyone. No one else can make that claim. He's like the air, in that he's very subtle, and also he's all pervasive. Vyapta, the word is used. Okay, now Srila Prabhupada's purport is underlining all these points. It's only the Lord who can offer all welfare to the worshiper. That's one of Srila Prabhupada's statements here. He says the demigods, he points out that the demigods require even the Lord's sanction before they can dispense benefits upon others. Means they're not the supreme. Krishna even goes so far as to say that those who are worshiping demigods are doing so in a manner that is illicit. It's a strong term he uses. Avidhi purvakam. Now we know that in the Vedas there are so many vidhis or injunctions given that if you want to go to Svarga, you worship so and so. If you want to, get this or that benefit, you worship so and so. The vidhis are there, and yet still Krishna will say, Yajanti avidhi purvakam. What is the point that he's making? He says that it is, Prabhupada translates it very, I want to say, gingerly. It is offered without true understanding. Literal translation is that they're doing so against the principle. They're doing so against the rules, Krishna says. That's what he says. He says, not me. So, Tepi Mameva Konteya, Yajanti Avidhi Purvakam. They're worshiping only me. Prabhupada quotes this verse. And as I mentioned already, a few times, Srila Prabhupada mentions in this one purport that these demigods are only material representatives of the Lord. And he also points out that a devotee or a scholar knows who is who. And that kind of implies, we should take it, that we should know who is who. And how will we know who is who? We have to study Srila Prabhupada's books. That's why he stayed up all night, every night, to write them. Only thinking of the future, because he knew some sincere person is coming in the future who will read this and get the benefit from it. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. We should be so thankful to Srila Prabhupada for his sacrifice. Such a perfect representative of exactly the kind of person that Maharaj Parikshit is speaking of in this verse, exactly the kind of person that Maharaj Parikshit saw as his duty to protect. And for that reason, he was ready to kick out the Kali Yuga. So, and then Prabhupada concludes his purport. Those who are not so learned, they may be worshiping these demigods, but their worship is irregular. Another very nice way of saying the same thing that Krishna says in very strong language. All right, so I'm going to stop here, but if anybody has any questions or comments, we can discuss as need be.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much, His Grace Mukunda, Dr. Prabhu. In the first place, I would like to render our sincere apologies to you, because if you had seen the poster of your SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM class today, we misspelled your name.
Oh, okay.
Instead of Mukunda Datta, we spelled it Mukunda Dutta. And when I later on realized, I said, oh, you were the cause of my spiritual master's lamentation. My spiritual master is Bhaktitirtha Swami Maharaj, and during his final days, anytime he heard of the name Mukunda Datta, that would throw him into ecstasy, because Mukunda Datta was the younger brother of Vasudev Datta. And he wanted to take upon himself the mood of Vasudev Datta. So thank you for being here today, Prabhuji. And I believe devotees may have questions for you, because I personally do have some questions for you, but I would like to see if other devotees will first ask their question before I do. So devotees, if you have a question, please indicate that by using the hand emoji, and you'll be asked to unmute to ask your question. Well, Prabhuji, while we wait for others to ask their questions, I have a question. From the text and the purport, it appears that, of course, we know Lord Shri Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is not in need of anything. And so whenever there is any offering made to him, he is only looking at the love and the devotion behind the offering. So you said that the Lord does not accept offerings from sinful people, which is what the Lord himself, I believe, says, because he is not in need of anything. It's just looking for the love and devotion. Now, if the Lord does not accept offerings from sinful people, then how does sinful people get out of their sins to become devotees? Because most of us, if not all of us, are sinners, and we have to start from wherever we are at to get out of our sinful nature. So if the Lord does not accept our offerings while being sinful, then how do we get out of sin? That's my question.
Yes, very good question. I mean, there's a few things that I can say about this, at least a couple, 2-3 ways to answer this question. But the first thing is that actually the Lord does whatever he wants. And we see that on occasion, sometimes the Lord, for his own purposes, he actually does accept the offerings, even of sinful persons. We can't depend on that or expect that kind of treatment. It's kind of like expecting that you're going to get an honorary degree without doing anything. So, you know, the fact is that the Lord, if he wants out of his causeless mercy, he can accept anyone's service, anytime, anywhere, any place. So that's one thing. The second point is that, yes, because we may be sinful, we may assume that maybe the Lord is not inclined to accept my offering. Definitely the Lord will not be inclined to enjoy our offering if we are sinful. He won't enjoy it, and he might not even accept it either. But for that reason, we're all advised to become the sold out servants of someone whose service the Lord does accept. In other words, we have to accept a bona fide spiritual master and become a bona fide disciple of that spiritual master. When we have a sponsor for our soul in the form of a bona fide spiritual master, then the Lord will unhesitatingly accept us as one of his own, but only by his divine grace to spiritual master. That's one way to answer the question. And of course, the Yuga Dharma for this age is Harinama Sankirtana, the chanting of the Hare Krishna Mahamantra, which we have been instructed to go out into the public and just freely give to anyone and everyone. The holy name is there, and that is the Lord, and he is making himself fully accessible to everyone, whether those persons be sinful or not. So he is merciful. In the Kali Yuga, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has inaugurated this process as the most merciful of all Krishna's forms. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself is making himself accessible to everyone. That's why Rupa Goswami called him Mahavadanya, the most magnanimous of all personalities of Godhead. We know from Rupa Goswami's Laghu Bhagavatam that Krishna is the most merciful form of the Lord. And the most merciful form of Krishna himself is Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So we have the most merciful of the most merciful. And he's making himself freely available. Now, he made himself freely available to us through Srila Prabhupada. And therefore, if we somehow or other find a way to please Srila Prabhupada, or even please someone who has already pleased Srila Prabhupada, then we can be connected. Regardless of our flaws, we can and will be elevated if we are submissive. Just like Kali himself. Kali, when he surrendered and became a little bit submissive, Maharaj Parikshit spared him. So, like that. There are a few things to consider. I'm sure there are other things we can say as well.
Well, thank you so much, Prabhuji. My next question actually is connected to the answer you gave. You gave part of the answer to my question, I believe, but I will still ask so that I may get the other part of it. And that is, you had indicated in the course of your lecture that there are dangers if there are flaws in our Dharma, which I agree to that. So what do we do when we know that we are performing our Dharma, but because there are flaws, there is bound to be danger? What do we do? I'm trying to correlate this to what Krishna himself says in Gita 18:47 and 48, that as long as we are in this material world, whatever we do may be covered with some imperfections, with some flaws. So what do we do in the eyes of the scriptures when we're performing our Dharma, but we still have some flaws? Hare Krishna.
Nice question. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur has elaborately described this or explained this topic in his Chaitanya Shikshamritam, which I will refer you to read. It's a long description that we can't adequately cover tonight, but in gist, we're living in two worlds at once in this material world. We have one foot in the spiritual world and we have one foot in the material world. In the material world, our activities have to be governed by the Shastra in the form of mundane dharma. That's important because unless we follow dharma, then we become sinful. And when we become sinful, we can hardly become Krishna conscious. It's like it's like soaking wood in water and then trying to ignite it. It doesn't really work so well. So dharma is important, but it's not everything. And if there is some dharmasya glani, as Krishna calls it in Bhagavad Gita, or some discrepancy in the performance of our dharma, that's not to be taken. I mean to say that should not be a cause for too much alarm, because after all, we're not on the mundane path of karma kanda, dharma, we're on the transcendental path of bhakti yoga. And in bhakti, as you implied already, Krishna says, sarva dharman parityajya mamekam sharanam vraja tva sarva papebhyo mokshishyami. Krishna says, if there is a problem with your dharma, then don't worry about it, because if you're surrendered to me and that surrender entails some transgression of what would ordinarily be considered dharma, then it's not an issue with him. So these two things are here. We have our mundane responsibilities. We should always remain pious in our behavior, but even if it's so that we commit some flaw, abhichet suracharo bhajate mamananyabhak sadhureva samantyavya samyak vyavasito hisaha. Krishna says, if we are committed to the process of surrendering to Krishna, surrendering our lives to Krishna, then these mundane flaws are negligible in his eyes. That's the point that I'm making. I hope it's clear.
Yes, it is. Thank you so much, Prabhuji. So we have Shivanath Prabhu, please unmute. Prabhu, you are in Vrindavan now, right?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Jai Hari Bol. Pranav ki
Hare
jai.
Krishna.
His Grace Mukunda Datta Prabhu ki jai.
By the way, thank you for the garland.
Thank you. Prabhu, Prabhu, I want to refer to King Vena's assertion. King Vena was speaking to the Brahmanas that he said they are leaving their protector behind and they are thinking about somebody else. That what kind of mentality is that? They're supposed to be referencing him, worshiping him because he was the one giving them shelter. Instead, they are leaving them behind and thinking about somebody else to be worshipped or to be sacrificed, that demands sacrifice. So we see today a scenario of that such we see everywhere in the world today. People intend to see other people as demigods. So one may assert that the demigods, they are more closer than the people of today, than God himself. You have a comment to that, Prabhu?
I'm not sure I am following your question. I'm not sure what you're asking. Maybe if you want to restate it.
Okay. The question concerns King Vena. King Vena chastised the Brahmanas, the sages who have actually installed him after the death of his father or something. So one of his assertions was they are demanding the worship of the Lord instead of worshiping him who is giving them shelter. So I relate that assertion to these days phenomenon. We see that most of the people of these days, they intend to be more concerned with those who are giving them shelter, present shelter, than even having more shelter, more connection with the Lord. So it's more like the demigod, they are more closer, more reciprocating or more fulfilling than God himself. So we see this is so obvious. You see, even in every institution, every institution is there. People who intend to give more, more assistance, whatever. They intend to see them as this is my demigod, this is my worship, and forgotten Krishna. So in that case, what would be your comment, bro?
Well, we've already mentioned in regard to demigod worship, a similar principle that dhya bhinnam pashet sakhalo harinama hitakaraha shivasya shri vishnu arya gunanamadi sakalam. That the Padma Purana actually states very directly that on one hand, you don't make any distinction between, say, Shiva and Vishnu. But on the other hand, it's also stating that you don't want to say that Vishnu and Shiva are non-different. So it's kind of hard to understand. Without the help of a bona fide spiritual master, it's not likely that any of us would have understood this principle without Srila Prabhupada. But the idea is that the Lord is the ultimate authority, and any more immediate authority, or I want to say intermediate authority, is only an authority to the extent that they're representing the Lord. In King Vena's case, he was claiming the authority he was claiming to be an authority because he was the king after all, and the king is regarded like that, but he wasn't acting like the king. And similarly in this passage, actually Kali Yuga made the same argument to Maharaj Parikshit that, you know, you may be the king, that's okay, but I'm the king of this age. You're the king of the country, but I'm the king of this time period. And so you don't have jurisdiction. He actually said this, Kali. So there is sometimes a conflict when the Krishna consciousness is missing. There may be a conflict between the Lord and the representative of the Lord. And for that reason, people may become confused and people may be misled. If they follow the Lord's supposed representative, who's actually not properly situated, then along with him, they will go to hell. And if, on the other hand, if they try to, overstep their position or try to supersede or evade the immediate representative of the Lord who is sent to help them, that's also becomes an offensive situation. So it's a fine line. It's kind of like an achinja bheda bheda, that we have someone who is the Lord but not the Lord at the same time. King Venu was claiming that I'm God, so just don't worry about Vishnu because it's me. So, he was obviously off, and the Brahmins shut him down for that reason. Sometimes it's not so simple or gross, Sometimes the Bhagavatam, we see that, what speak of Vena Maharaj, even Krishna in this Govardhan Leela, for example, Krishna is also speaking things that are in the Vedas, but he's exaggerating them in such ways to make them invalid. That's what Vena was doing also. So, therefore we have to read Srila Prabhupada's books. Therefore we have to know. Shrutakirti Prabhu mentioned just a few days ago that devotee asked Srila Prabhupada, how do we know the difference between a principle and a detail? And Prabhupada became pensive, and he answered, that requires some intelligence. It's not so easy to become Krishna conscious, even if we have a bona fide spiritual master, because we have to actually assimilate what that bona fide spiritual master is teaching, and we have to really understand it. We have to really understand it, which is not so easy thing. It takes practice. So that's why we have so much emphasis on training, and that's why we have so much emphasis on hearing in particular. The one verse that Srila Prabhupada spoke from more than any other verse in all of his books was Bhagavad Gita chapter 7, text number 1 and 2. Yatha jnasasi tatshrinu. Just hear. In the beginning, that's what we have to do. We just have to hear. And we have to hear until it's clear. We have to hear until we actually properly understand. That in itself is a challenge. That's why unless someone is situated in the practice of Krishna consciousness, he cannot see things clearly, even if he tries. This is something Krishna says in chapter 15. We have to be practicing the standard practice of Krishna consciousness while we're hearing and trying to become Krishna conscious. And the emphasis should be on Krishna consciousness, not Guru consciousness or demigod consciousness or king consciousness or any other intermediary between the Lord and the living entity. Srila Prabhupada deliberately named this society the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and he never put himself forward as a very in any prominent never gave himself any prominence other than what was appropriate. because he didn't want it to turn into a personality cult, which often happens in institutions very easily. So the emphasis should always be on God. And when our minds are on God, then we can see all other things in perspective very clearly. Bilvamangala Thakur has written very nicely. He says, only when our minds are actually fixed on Krishna, then we can give stern thought to philosophy, sensitive thought to literature, and constant thought to our responsibility. So the emphasis should always be on Krishna, and then everything will be okay. I hope I'm answering your question.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the answer. I have a follow-up question to the answer you gave to Tribhunath Prabhu, but I think I will let Govinda Prabhu ask his question. Govinda Prabhu, please unmute and ask your question, please.
All right, thank you very much. My obeisances to you, Prabhuji, and obeisances to all the devotees on this platform. Prabhu, my question is concerning the activities of living entities and the resurgent action. We understand that whatever we do, there is opposite and corresponding reaction to every action that we perform. And as a result of that, the living entities who are deviant from the laws of nature will have to visit the abode of Yamaraj for the deserving punishment. And according to SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM, there are varieties of hellish planets which are designed for a particular sinful activity that one may commit. So he go there for that that deserving punishment. And now the question is, if the living entity has gone for his punishment, we know that here in the material world, in every country and its laws, if one stays as obedient citizen, he is free from the wrath of the government. But as soon as one commits or breaks the laws of the country, he goes to jail. He may go to jail for a certain number of years and experiencing a particular punishment based on the gravity of his sin. And as soon as he serves his imprisonment and come out, the government doesn't chase him again for anything because he has already fulfilled his punishment. Now, why is it that a living entity may go to hell and experiencing all kinds of punishment based on his actions, and then when he reincarnates and take another form, again he has to go through the same reactions to the sins that he committed, even though he has already gone to hell for the deserving punishment. So I'm talking of the law of karma. Sometimes one may take birth as a blind person, as a deformed, so much complications. One may become poor and this and that, so many things. One may be very highly intelligent, based on. So why I need more explanation to this particular dimension of a living entity's activity.
Okay, as I understand, you're asking why someone has to be punished twice for the same sin. I'm not sure I'm following your question, but that's what I got.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, basically, yes.
Okay. Well, I don't think that a person necessarily is punished twice for the same sin, unless I'm missing something. If you commit, like I said, like you said, if you commit a sinful activity, you receive the punishment for that sin, and then you come back again. Your slate has been cleaned. But the problem in this case is that our slate is never entirely cleaned, because we have this vasana within the heart. We have desires that are sinful. We have ignorance, really, is what it comes down to within our hearts. And the atonement for a particular sinful activity cannot be, it's not sufficient to erase that ignorance from our heart. So the ignorance that gives rise to the sinful activity in the first place, that has not been sufficiently dealt with. This is the problem with prayashchitta, or atonement. This whole topic is dealt with very elaborately in the 6th canto in the narration of Ajamil. So I will refer you to that. And it is very, very elaborately discussed. Several chapters it goes on, and many purports Srila Prabhupada devotes to this very question. But in a nutshell, as I'm understanding your question, we don't have to be punished repeatedly for the same sin, but we should note that even if we are absolved of reactions as a result of having undergone karmic reactions, our ignorance is going to remain, and so we're likely to commit the same thing again, which is what people do. But when we take to Krishna consciousness, that is one major difference between Krishna consciousness and karma kanda. Karma kanda will only erase one karmic reaction, and you're free to do whatever you like after that. But with Krishna consciousness, your karma is erased as well, but your consciousness has changed. Your ignorance is also eradicated, and so you're spiritually elevated, such that you don't go back and commit the same stupid mistakes again. That's the point. It's a long-term, permanent solution, which cannot be said of just ordinary punya and papa, or good karma, bad karma, so to speak. Is that okay?
Yes, Prabhu. I asked this question, when we study the past life regression. You see that the sins that are committed, many years ago, like 5, 6, 1,000 years ago, I believed that those sins, definitely, those who committed those sins would have definitely visited a court of Yamaraj for deserving the punishment or judgment. Now, when you do the past life regression, you see that same soul has come back again, and in this lifetime, he's going through so much suffering based on what he did that lifetime of his existence. Okay. And the perfect example is in the Bible. There is this personality called Elijah. Elijah came as Elijah for his head to be beheaded, because in his previous life, he has fought against the fetish priest of Baal. They had an argument, and he happened to defeat them. And as a result of that, he was asked those fetish priests' head to be beheaded. And so all the fetish priests' head were beheaded at that time. So that time he was called Elijah. So he came back again as John the Baptist. When he was Elijah, he killed people. So he came as John the Baptist, and his head was beheaded because of his previous sin. And I believe that sin definitely would take him to hell. And so if he has gone for the punishment from that sin he committed, then why does he have to come back again as a John the Baptist for his head also to be beheaded.
Mhm.
So that brings me to the point that the punishment is like twice given.
Okay. Well, I can't confirm or deny anything that's stated in some other scripture. I'm not an authority on the Bible, so I'm not going to go there. But and even if we're going to appeal to, say, past life regressions and such things, you know, I can't vouch for the veracity of those practices either, because I'm just not familiar enough to speak with authority on them. But what we're speaking of is from Bhagavad Gita and SRIMAD Bhagavatam. And what we learn from these authorities is that, again, as we may undergo a particular karmic reaction, but the samskar remains, the imprint, the psychological imprint remains, even after we have committed a sinful activity. That takes us to hell, we suffer, and we get purified to some degree, but it's going to leave some stain on our consciousness. That's just the way it is. And it's not exactly double jeopardy, because the mark that is left on one's consciousness is going to be significantly diminished. But the ignorance is still there, and the ignorance is the ultimate cause of the sins and the tendency to sin, I mean to say. So that's where we focus in our efforts in Krishna consciousness, rather than trying to unravel things at a karmic level, especially through speculation. We want to hear from authorities and apply the instructions in such a way that our consciousness becomes spiritually elevated, so that we don't have to take birth again. So Krishna consciousness does that. It purifies the samskars, it purifies the subtle body. It elevates us out of the ignorance that leads us into so many wrong activities. So that's the real beauty of Krishna consciousness. Other processes can't really do that, especially if they're based in karma. I hope that's okay.
Yeah,
That's okay. That's okay, Prabhu. Thank you very, very much. I will allow others to ask questions also, but I have a follow-up question to this very answer. So I will leave the floor for others to come in.
Yeah, Hare Krishna, thank you so much. It's Grace Mukunda, that Prabhu. I also do not know much about the Bible, but I know a little bit about this particular pastime of Elijah beheading the worshippers of the Baal demigod, and then he coming back later as John the Baptist to be beheaded. I do not think we can say, even from the Bible itself, that it's a double jeopardy, like Prabhuji was saying. Because in the Bible, it is said that Elijah, after he had beheaded these people, went to heaven. You know, so he did not go to face Yamarad. So after he enjoyed his glorious life in heaven, then he had to come back to earth to face his punishment. So that is my little understanding. So it's not like a double jeopardy. He went to heaven to enjoy, and then after he had exhausted his piety, he had to come back to earth to pay back what he did. Harichakra Prabhu, please, you may unmute. Prabhuji, I believe you are in Vrindavan, India, right? Yes, so I'm also considering your time. We do not want to take you too deep into the night. So if you want to leave, you let us know, and then we'll cut short our questions, because we do ask questions lots of the time. But Harichakra Prabhu, please unmute, and then you go ahead with your question.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Dandavad Pranam. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Gurudev. Yeah, my question is just a follow-up to the question that Govinda Prabhu asked. I guess in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna asked Krishna a similar question. Arjuna asked Krishna that what happens to a man of faith who in the beginning was doing so wonderfully, but during the latter part, desist from the path of righteousness. What happens to him? Does he just get lost completely? And Krishna said, no. Somebody who does that, he is promoted to the heavenly kingdom. And after many, many years of enjoyment in the heavenly kingdom, he comes again and he will be born into a rich aristocratic family, or he will be born into a Brahmanical, pious Brahmanical family. So like that, doesn't that mean that the person is having double enjoyment after many, many years of enjoyment in the heavenly kingdom? Then again, he is born here because of the pious activities he performed. Then he come and continue by being born into a rich aristocratic family or a pious Brahmanical family.
I don't know that you can say it's like a double sentence, because the nature of Krishna consciousness is also piety. There's no denying that. Bhagavatam calls it Punya Shravana Kirtanam, because it has that nature. So a devotee will, in general, be situated in sattva guna. He will be situated in generic mundane piety, but that's not to say that he's on the mundane platform. This is the point. So, and it's also not necessarily always true that a devotee who's not completely successful in Krishna consciousness will go to the heavenly planets. Everything just depends on the individual circumstances. Sometimes a person may be liberated if he has a tendency for Gyan, and he will go to the Brahma Jyoti, or he may go to Siddha Loka, or he may be going to so many other places where there's not necessarily the same kind of opportunities for material opulence and material enjoyment. Or if a person is not really that pious, neither is he Krishna conscious, he may not even go to the heavenly planets. He may take birth again as a human being. So it all depends on the individual circumstances. And of course, Krishna's mercy, which we've discussed already. I don't think you can make a really a one size fits all sort of an answer, because Krishna is person. We're also persons, and Krishna consciousness is not static, it's dynamic. So it all depends.
Hare Krishna, thank you so much, Prabhuji. I had said that I had a follow-up question to Tribhuvannath Prabhu's question he asked you earlier. And that was during the communist era, the communists had also said something crazy, excuse my language, like that why are you praying to God? Pray to your God for bread. They prayed to God and there was no bread. Pray to the communist government and you have bread. And they had bread. So they realized that, oh, why should we cry on somebody we cannot even see, we cannot hear, we cannot get any help from? But of course, Srila Prabhupada explains that is very childish, because where did the communists have the wheat to make the flour, to make the bread, things like that. But we see in our present time that we want immediate results. And I think it's the main reason why Lord Shiva has more followers than Krishna. Because you follow Krishna, it's up to Krishna. He may give, he may not give. Even though he himself says that even if you want material things, you still come to me. But you go to Krishna, he may give, he may not give. But Lord Shiva is Ashutosh, is very easily pleased. And so he has this follow. So what is your advice from the eyes of the scriptures that people, and especially devotees, do not get swayed by this immediate and instant gratification or instant results of our desires, as opposed to serving Krishna, for the ultimate good? what's your advice to devotees? I would say devotees because you're speaking to devotees here. Hare Krishna.
Well, this is just really, this is going all the way back to the Upanishads, which mention the two things, that Shreyas and Prayas. Shreyas is the immediately appealing thing and immediately comfortable thing and immediately gratifying thing, but it's not necessarily ultimately good for us. And Shreyas is the long-term good, which may not be so comfortable or appealing in the beginning. So, it's not to say that the inherent worth of either of each of them is equal. It's not. Things that are of the nature of Shreyas are inherently superior to things that are of the nature of Shreyas. That is a fact. And if we don't recognize that, then that's called less intelligent. Put it bluntly. And people tend to be less intelligent. And that's why they go for the, Krishna himself says in Bhagavad Gita, it's the people, the Alpa Buddhi, who go to the demigods to get these, comfortable results quickly. It's less intelligent. And what can you do? There are such people. T. Barnum said there's a sucker born every minute. So some people are going to go for this because people are stupid. And there's no polite way to say that. It's just the way it is. Most people are not so bright, but those who are pious and those who are intelligent, they can process Krishna consciousness. And if they're also honest and have any sense of virtue, they will practice. So we're selling diamonds, Srila Prabhupada said. And diamonds, it's not so easy thing to buy diamonds. You have to be prepared to pay a lot of money. It is an easy thing to go to Chor Bazaar or the thieves market. And, just for a few dollars, you can buy a cubic zirconia. Looks just like diamond. Ordinary person will not be able to tell the difference. Even a very careful person can often not tell the difference because they make such good ones nowadays. So it depends on what you want. You have to decide what you want. If you want diamonds, then diamonds are diamonds. If you want CZs instead, then cubic zirconia is a different thing. You can have that also, but it's not a diamond. So we're selling diamonds. Krishna consciousness is the ultimate Shreyas. And, if people are not interested in that, what can we do? But we certainly should try to encourage people that this is the real benefit of human life, that you can actually attain liberation from so much suffering forever. And you can actually get this unlimited bliss of love of Godhead. It's possible if you follow the process. And the process is very practical and very pleasing and very easy. And so in these ways, we can encourage people. And we do encourage people. Even, as I said a little while ago, even if it's only as simple as encouraging someone to take prasadam, that's a start. You have to start somewhere. So, we encourage people to chant Hare Krishna. We encourage people to come to the temple, to take prasadam. These simple things. And once people do, then they get purified, and then they generally, once the intelligence is awakened, then they can see. And then they have some serious decision making to do. But that's where the holy name comes in, because we can memorize Srimad Bhagavatam, and if our hearts have not become purified, we will simply use the Srimad Bhagavatam to exploit other people. I see this all the time here in Vrindavan. On the other hand, if we really sincerely chant the holy name and study Srimad Bhagavatam, then we will have the internal wherewithal, so to speak, that when we hear an instruction that may not be immediately appealing, we can still follow it, knowing well that this is going to elevate me, and it's going to ultimately help other people as well. This is what human life is for. If we don't want to be human beings, then we don't have to continue as human beings. There are 8,399,000 other options. So, it's up to us. People have to know what they want, and they have to make their decisions wisely. That's all.
Well, thank you so much, Prabhuji. If you would give me your mercy, I have one more question. And I promise this will be my last question. And I would plead with you to try your possible best to give me an objective answer, because I'm going to ask an objective question, because it is an actual event that took place, and it's very much related to the text discussed today. So a devotee once called me and informed me that in his temple, the temple authority performed fire sacrifice. And in performance of this fire sacrifice, which was Krishna Janmashtami night specifically, the temple leadership invited a professionally ritualistic priest to perform the fire sacrifice in the temple. And in the sacrificial arena were number of demigods displayed. And he felt that that was improper. But he also didn't have the courage to approach the leadership. And so what he did was he left the temple room. So when he told me it had already taken place, so there was really nothing I could do. So I said to him, well, I think you did the right thing that you left the temple room. But in the text, in the purport that we read today, Srila Prabhupada specifically says that, therefore, he directly, that is devotee of the Lord, of Krishna, directly worships the Supreme Lord, and it's not diverted by the material qualitative representations. Those who are not so learned worship such qualitative material representations, but their worship is unceremonious because it is irregular. So we do not expect this coming from temple leadership, because we are supposed to be learned. We may not be learned, but we are supposed to. Now, what is your advice in such a situation? What advice do you give to a devotee experiencing a situation like this in his temple? Hare Krishna.
Now I'm in the hot seat. In the same passage that we're discussing, Maharaj Parikshit and Kali had in their discussion, it has been mentioned already that a person who points out wrongdoing, he gets the same destination as the wrongdoer himself gets. So we don't like to point at people and blame people and name names and, get involved so much in specific controversies. One thing I can say is a very important thing, because it's not said enough, and that is that there is a standard methodology for unraveling any kind of ideological disagreement or philosophical misunderstanding, or these kinds of issues. They can be resolved objectively, since you're asking, according to a standard system of epistemology or pramanas that Srila Prabhupada taught us. And that is that whatever we're doing has to be grounded first and foremost in Shastra, which is to say scripture, because scripture is the center of all. But that scripture also has to be received in a bona fide line of disciplic succession, And it has to be received in the way that it has been explained by that disciplic succession. You may have noticed that in the beginning of tonight's class, we went through the whole line of acharyas commenting on this verse for that reason. And then in particular, we have to get the most specific direction and immediate practical direction from the spiritual master. Now, sometimes we find that there are cases where either through our own ignorance or through the lack of detail that is in the Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra, we may find a circumstance in which even after scrutinizing the Shastra, Guru, and Sadhu, we still can't understand what is to be done. I wrote an article about this many years ago. The topic is aitihyam, and aitihyam is a kind of, I'm using it as a synonym of shishtachara. It's mentioned in the 11th canto, I think it's chapter 19, text 17. Krishna tells Uddhava, if you want to understand the situation of this, practicing Krishna consciousness in the material world, you have 4 resources. One of them is the Shabda, the other one is Anumana, the other one is Pratyaksha. I think we all know these terms. And he gives a 4th one, Aitihyam. Aitihyam is a reference to traditional precedent. Just like in a court of law, how has this situation been decided in previous cases? All the time, this is a tool that is used by lawyers. Cases are won and lost on the basis of how a previous court interpreted the situation. That is a kind of a similar thing. So this is an important thing. We have to receive the teachings of our Shastras in our Guru Parampara as given to us by our spiritual master, but it should not contradict what predecessor acharyas have said as well. Now in Srila Prabhupada's, in this particular case, I'll get a little more specific here. Srila Prabhupada is pretty clear. In his practical directions, he did not want ISKCON facilities to be used for any kind of demigod worship. One could argue about whether that was done or not. I won't get into it, but it's pretty clear that Srila Prabhupada didn't like for devotees to be seen as endorsing any kind of Devata Puja, because we don't. It's against our principle of exclusive dependence on Lord Krishna. As demigod worship goes, I don't discourage anybody from worshiping demigods if they want to. That's their choice. And it's the way I see it, it's better to worship a demigod than to bribe one of your mid-level management workers in your corporation, because it leads to the Vedic path. But if we're practicing Vaishnavas, and certainly if we're in an ISKCON temple, it should not be going on. That much I can say. This is objective. I think it's pretty easy to demonstrate all these things. But, in terms of time, place, and circumstance, an awful lot of things can be justified for an awful lot of reasons. And that's where the methodology that I mentioned, it comes in as being very important. There is a standard methodology. There is a hierarchy of evidence that we have to accept and we have to apply. And that means that in order to do that, we have to be familiar with it to begin with. And, in a day and age when nobody reads any kind of books, it's pretty hard to get people to read religious books. And that includes Srila Prabhupada's books, unfortunately. Srila Prabhupada himself used to criticize his disciples that, you think these books are only for selling, but actually they're meant for reading. If we read Srila Prabhupada's books as much as he instructed us to read them, we wouldn't have over half the controversies that tear us apart. They wouldn't exist. It is all coming from ignorance. So really the thing to focus on, I would say, is our methodology. Are we really following the system of Guru, Sadhu, Shastra? Do we know the Shastra enough that we can follow that system? These are the things we need to put our attention into. I hope that's helpful answer.
so much. Yeah, thank you so much, Prabhuji. That was a very honest and very straightforward answer. As much as lots of us, if not all of us, being devotees, know what our system is. Thank you so much. I can't thank you enough, Prabhuji, for giving us your time and spending so much of your time with us, even though it's so late, your time there in India, Vrindavan. But thank you. I have more questions, but we have to let you go because every time we have Srila Prabhupada's disciple, personally, I like to ask questions because I just can't imagine being in the presence of Srila Prabhupada, but we will leave it for another time. And we hope to see you someday soon when we do throw you an invitation to come and visit us on this platform. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So
if you have programs at other times also, that would be much easier because late night programs really tear me apart. I'm sorry to say.
Yes.
It's difficult for me to recover from that.
Okay, we'll see. Sometimes we have other programs that do not follow exactly this time. So when we do, thanks for letting us know. We will let you know.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's been a great honor and joy and privilege to be of any service to you tonight. And I really appreciate kind invitation and value all of your association. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So at this point, we're going to humbly request all the devotees to kindly unmute, and then we chant the loudest Hare Krishna Maha Mantra to express our appreciation for Prabhuji's presence here and enlightening us in SRIMAD BHAGAVATAM. Jai. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama,
Rama Rama, Hare
Hare Kalpatarubhyascha, Kripa Sindhya Patitanam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavamyo. All glory to Nandana Prabhu ki Jai.
Lord Bhakta Prabhu ki jai. Hare.
So thank you all devotees, and we hope to see you all again tomorrow. So